Hello, everyone. So, this is called The Science Behind Photography. I know a lot of you like to use cameras and play around with them. They're cool technology, especially in iPhones, Androids, but even better DSLR cameras. So, I have two that I'll be showing you, and they're both DSLR cameras. The APS-C camera, that means that inside of it has a crop sensor. The sensor inside of here, or behind the sensor, is a mirror. Now this one's my favorite. I like this type of camera because it's great for traveling too. It also means you can use different types of lenses. So this is called a pancake lens. This is a 24 millimeter, meaning it is a wide shot. It's a 24 millimeter, but you have to multiply it by 1.6. You do this when you have a camera with a crop sensor in it. So the shot won't be as wide as you expect. So yes, it is a 24 millimeter though. So if you're using a 24 millimeter and the mirror inside of it is big, it's going to cost you more for your lens, but it's good for printing bigger pictures. That's the type of photography that I prefer to do. So there are three pillars of photography I want to talk about: light, and so now there are three what are called pillars of photography that I want to talk about. And talking about these will help you understand how to take a better picture. The first one is aperture. That helps you to be able, it's the lens size within the lens, and if you have a smaller one, or if you have an aperture changes the size of the lens. Some lenses have a small aperture, which means that the lens will be open quite large, so you get a lot of light in the picture, but the background will be really blurry. That's what a 1.8 is. But say you make the lens size smaller, you will raise the aperture to like a 4.0 or a 6.0, and I'll show you the difference between the two so you can compare. The camera aperture is typically on the outside of the lens. This type of lens is called a prime lens. It has a fixed focal length. This one is an 85 millimeter. So it will only take pictures at 85 millimeters of distance. You can see it written right here. So next to it is where the aperture is written on this one, and that is, again, the size that the lens can get to. So when you're traveling, if you want different distances, you may want to invest in a zoom lens. However, the aperture in it tends to be smaller. This is a 24 millimeter to 105 millimeter. You can change the distance while you stay in one place on this camera. However, the lowest aperture setting is a 4.0. This is where it's written. Now, again, the prime lens you have to walk back and forth in order to change the distance of your subject, but with a zoom lens, you don't have to. Now, in my prime, this 24 millimeter, but remember with my camera, because it has a crop sensor, you have to multiply it by 1.6. If you don't have one, don't worry about that. But with this one, you have to move quite a large distance, but it's a really great lens to develop your photography skills. And it has a small aperture setting, but you do have to walk back and forth. This is a simple lens to use because it lets you focus on your skills. So we talked about aperture, but now let's transition to ISO. And I'm sure many of you remember using an older camera with film, and you had to do all this extra work in order to control how much light was exposed on the picture. But in today's era, it's a different technology. The camera inside of it, or inside the camera, is able to control all that. So ISOs can go anywhere from 100 to 32,000, but you really only want to use those really high numbers for nighttime photography. If you want to take pictures of the stars, you want a large ISO to get a lot of light in the frame. For daylight photography, you're going to want to use a smaller number. You'll have to figure that stuff out. If we were to take pictures like a day on today, you may want to use 1 to 200 ISO, because in your picture, so when you like really take apart the picture, you'll realize some of it is grainy. And so the lower your ISO number is, the less grainy. And once you start getting into the higher numbers, that's when it really becomes like that. You have to play with your camera until you're satisfied with the amount of noise in it. The last thing we're going to talk about is shutter speed. I still struggle with this. It's tough to learn. So shutter speed is the speed in which the lens closes and takes the picture. So you typically want to match your shutter speed and your ISO. That's a good starting point. If you're taking pictures of a fast-moving subject like a plane, for instance, you're going to want a faster shutter speed. Maybe 1/2000, 1/3000, you'll have to figure that out. That allows you to catch the image as it's moving. If you want the blur, you're gonna have a slower shutter speed. That might be good for taking pictures of water and streams. So the three pillars that we talked about were aperture, ISO, which was how much light, and shutter speed, which is how fast the lens moves. And while phone technology cameras are cool, and you can do all of that, you can't play with that stuff on there. You also have to figure out which type of camera you prefer to use. There's three. So there's my favorite, which is the crop sensor. That's what both of mine are. So the mirror inside of it is small. But most professionals prefer to use a full frame camera, and the mirror inside is quite large. Or there are mirrorless cameras, and they use special technology to control all of that. They're interesting. So you decide which one you want. If you're doing a lot of traveling, you're probably going to want the cropped sensor. That's what I have, the APS-C. But you'll have to buy a quite large zoom lens. But remember to multiply everything by 1.6. But you can figure out your preference. The full frame is typically a little bit heavier and more expensive, but that's what professionals tend to use. Especially people in magazines, movies, that's what they use. The mirrorless cameras are new and people are still trying to figure them out. A lot of YouTubers use them. Or no, you can find a lot of information on YouTube about them and compare. That way when you go to the store, you can play with them and figure out which ones you want. The cost of a camera, it can go anywhere from $200 all the way up to $3,500. It really just depends. Whether you get it used or new, that's also up to you. But happy photography.